Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Teaching General Conference. I hope your lessons are going great at this point, or maybe this is the first lesson that you've ever taught in a second hour of Relief Society or Elders Quorum. And fear not, because Teaching General Conference is here. We hope that you subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us, our podcast feed as well. And that way you can come back here and share or hopefully gain something from what other people are sharing. And I just put a call out there. I would love to get to a point someday that every general conference we are able to cover every conference talk that's published, and that way, no matter what conference talk you're focusing on during those 6-month period, you'll always find a Teaching General Conference aid here. So if you know somebody or are somebody who is confident in your teaching and have some skill sets you can share or tactics, strategies, please reach out. You can comment on this video and love to hear from you and get you on the Teaching General Conference feed as well. So I'm really excited for this one. This was I don't know, you call it the dark horse talk of General Conference, the one we didn't expect, and that is the conference talk by Elder Brown, The Eternal Gift of Testimony. You'll remember this one, that just the passion that was involved, and the delivery was fantastic, and just so well done by Elder Brown. And this was, I mean, he's only been not even a 70 for a year, right? And here he is sharing from the most famous lectern in the church, and did a fantastic job. It's really interesting to see kind of the virality of this general conference talk. I'm sure many of you noticed on social media, there was a lot of chit chat about it and discussion. And I actually, through Leading Saints, my main platform, we have an online community called Zion Lab. And I took a survey of the audience saying, which talk, and I'll go to it here, which talk would you most like to study in Elders Quorum and Relief Society, from this most recent talk of October of 2025. And let's see here. And this is the results here. So Elder Brown was the most requested individual talk that people want to study. You can see how the rest lay out. Obviously, President Oaks, Elder Uchtdorf, Elder Holland, Elder Karen. So anyways, that might be a good reference. You can see the full results at over at Zion Lab. You can get there by going to leadingsaints.org/Zion, and that will get you in the community. And there's a lot of good stuff happening over there as well. It'd be a good place to just be familiar with. So, all right, let's go back here to the talk. And a few things I want to mention. And this is a suggestion that I would probably tell you never to do unless you had a really good reason to do it. And that is, you may want to consider showing the entire clip at the beginning of your class. Now, again, I even hesitate to say it now. It'd be up to your jurisdiction, but there's so much energy and passion in the delivery of Elder Brown's talk that it will bring an emotional experience into the room. And this is really important just in general as a teacher. Sometimes we start intellectually, we continue intellectually, and we end intellectually, right? Where we're only engaging the sort of the black and white parts of our brain, right? Here's a fact, here's doctrine, here's not doctrine, whatever. And to really have a successful experience and for it to be transformational, it is crucial for emotion to be experienced in that, right? That's why testimony, which we're about to talk about, is so key in this type of talk. But so how can you, in the beginning, you want to warm up your audience to the experience, and more specifically, warm up the audience to an emotional experience. And so listening to the entire talk of Elder Brown will do that. Now, there's other ways to do it, but anyways, just a suggestion to consider. If I was to teach this lesson, I don't know. I probably wouldn't do that. But again, I just want to put this out there. I would never, I've seen some teachers sort of be like, oh, I can maybe burn 15 minutes by just showing the talk that we're going to talk about anyways. But it eats up a good chunk of time that I would always discourage that. But I think there's an exception with this talk, just with the passion of it all. So, anyways, all right, let's go through this. As I've talked about um, in other videos I've done, I usually go through and I just read it through once and say, what are the doctrinal points in this talk? What are the as core doctrine as we can get? What are those points? And that will give us, as in our preparation, some footholds in the lesson, because we always want to center and focus on clear eternal truths or doctrines or teachings of the church. So I guess it's kind of brown. I think I did choose red, but anyways, on my dark background looks a little brown. But so God is our loving Father, and He talks about these three. Actually, let's see. I'm using different colors, but he has these 3 points that he talks about, 3 powerful truths of the restoration. So whenever there's like a list or a number of things in a general conference talk, that always jumps out to me, right? Because I can use that either as a rough outline, as a focus. I can maybe even just take one of those points and say, actually, I'm just going to focus on number 2 here during my lesson, right? Because you really don't have, I always come back to this, you don't have a lot of time. 45 minutes, I think on average, sometimes it's 40 minutes, depending on other stuff going on. Announcements, or if your Elders Quorum Relief Society starts with a council meeting on a separate topic. So you really want to be choosy with what you're focusing on. So just because there's 3 points doesn't mean you should only focus on 3 points. It could just be one or 2, right? So I got those 3 points. We'll come back to these other things. And here's one. Oh, that's a question I'll ask, and this is one that it wasn't necessarily, and this is just my opinion. It wasn't necessarily that this talk was like packed full of like doctrinal truths. I mean, there are some here, right? And you could really, go through this with a fine comb and find these doctrinal points. But this was much more of like a motivational or an inspirational talk. And it's really important as you're planning a lesson to step back and say, what is the tone of this talk, right? What is the speaker trying to accomplish? Is he trying, like President Oak's talks are often, he's obviously trying to teach clear core doctrine. Where other talks like this one, I would say, no, he's actually trying to inspire individuals to engage in the gospel. And that's okay. But if we try and teach a talk like Elder Brown's, as assuming it's this only full of, packed full of doctrinal statements and truths and things, we won't have a ton to work with, or it might seem forced, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, let's go through here. So those headings. This one here, we are agents. We are agents, and agents are responsible for something. In this case, we are responsible for the choices we make based on the knowledge we have and the gifts we are given. So this whole section, and I'll highlight other points as well, but this concept of bringing agency into testimony is really fascinating to me. And maybe I've just been, had my blinders on or oblivious to this happening in the past, but I've never thought about testimony this way per se, or I've never seen it talked about this way. Maybe a general conference talk, as far as like testimony and choice. Oftentimes we want testimony and spirit, right? Which he gets to in the third part here. Our testimony comes through the power of the Holy Ghost. But this concept of like realizing we're agents, and the way he frames this, I mean, we use this phrase free agency so often in our church, in our church vocabulary, that we don't realize, oh yeah, what an agent is, right? This is somebody with autonomy, or we are agents, and agents are responsible for something. That's really fascinating, right? In this case, we are responsible for the choices we make based on the knowledge we have and the gifts we are given. So he's kind of conflating this concept of testimonies about knowledge we receive, but also the choice of what we do with it. And that just gave me pause. And there's so much I think you could sit with and prayerfully explore. and it would be a foundation of a phenomenal discussion. Like, what does that mean? Like, because oftentimes I think, on the primary superficial level, we think of testimony more as it was this moment. It was like the Spirit came to me. It was almost like the Spirit forced me to believe something that's true, right? I had no option. I was so overcome with the Spirit that I just had to believe, right? I'm not saying that doesn't happen. However, I think you see throughout the scriptures, you see in our personal lives with us individually and with friends and family, people who've had the witness, but they've decided to make a different choice as far as what to do with it, right? And so I think there's a lot there, and I could just go on and on about different ways to approach that, but that might be like, what is this role of choice in testimony? There's another place he mentions this. Let me come down. Um, that's not it. We'll come back to that. I think it's this next part. Here it is. It is taking charge of your testimony. It still requires, let me get my notes up here. It still requires a choice to receive this precious gift. Of course, my system is not working here. There it goes. So is believing a choice? I think there's so much that good that will come from this discussion by putting that out. Like, wait a minute, I did you choose to believe? Or were you kind of overwhelmingly convinced by a spiritual moment to believe? And is it one or the other? Like, what separates that, right? And I truly believe, like, I don't know, so often individuals, and I don't want to make light of these situations where people struggle with their faith or step away from the gospel. But so often I hear individuals who have maybe left the church, or left the gospel, stopped believing, deconstructed, all the buzzwords, right? And they look at me like, how can you believe when A, B, C, D, right? They can go down the laundry list. And often I look at them and I say, well, believe me, I know like there's some components of our doctrine, of our history, of our of common, living in common society in 2025, 2026, where I get it's sticky, it's messy. However, when I wake up, when I engage in the gospel, there's some level of a choice saying, this is what I believe. Now, not that I understand it all or have like an undeniable, every fiber of my being witness on every concept and doctrine of the gospel, but I'm going to choose to believe that Joseph Smith was a prophet. I'm going to choose to believe that the Book of Mormon is scripture revealed through the power of God, right? And from that premise, then we can seek out truth statements, right? And I know it's almost a paradox, right? Like, wait a minute, don't we start with the truth statements? Like, yeah, maybe, but there's going to be a choice along the way. And so Elder Brown does such a phenomenal job of unpacking and really intriguing our Latter-day Saint experience with this concept. Okay. All right. So this part, he goes in, as you'll probably remember, about his own personal story, even mentioning I did not know the exact spot where Joseph knelt to pray in the sacred grove, but I know exactly where I was when my sacred grove became a reality. So just before we get into that, one thing I'll mention here is that tell your story, not Elder Brown's story. So many times I hear this in the context of second hour, Elders Quorum lessons, where it's like, oh yeah, and he told this great story of him as growing up as a boy in Jamaica, and they go into the story, kind of like summarize it or even maybe read it. And in this context, in the second hour, this is where we shift, where it's not necessarily about the speaker anymore. It's about those in the class. So instead of telling Elder Brown's story about getting a testimony in Jamaica, what's your story of getting a testimony in your neck of the woods, right? Or what are other stories in this room of individuals who've gained a testimony? Where was it? And again, going down to, referencing Elder Brown talks about this sacred grove experience that you have. Did you have a sacred grove location or a specific spot that the witness came to you, right? And I guarantee you, hands will shoot up. Again, after you've warmed up the audience to this experience, people will share. Oh man, I was a missionary, MTC, finally reading the Book of Mormon for my first time. Like, you're going to get those stories, right? Oh, I was at the youth conference, the EFY, the FSY, that, I was a 40-year-old dad, right? After being inactive for years, like you're going to get so many stories. And that moment, bringing in those stories that are in the room, that's where the unifying happens. Like, oh, I didn't know that about Brother Jones. Oh, Sister Sally, like, wow, like I'm drawn to her, right? I want to know more about her. She's my sister now. He's my brother now, right? So I think there's uh, a lot can happen by focusing on the stories in the room. All right. This is one, he talked about Sister Audrey Krause, showed a great picture here. And again, you don't need to highlight, oh, and Sister Krause was there. Like who was the person? See if I can go. Who was your Sister Krause? Who were the individuals that were pivotal in your story of testimony, right? And when's the last time you reached out to them? When's the last time you wrote them a card? You sent them a text and just said, I just want you to remember the impact you've had on my life 20 years ago, 30 years ago, like 10 years ago, last year, right? And inviting the class to take action of like, actually, why don't you reach out to your Sister Krause, right? Maybe it's time they need to remember, right? They'll do something for their testimony by you reminding them what they did for your testimony, right? So I think that's a great opportunity there. All right. And here's another exception to, well, not necessarily exception. I think a general like strategy that's really effective is as you get to the end of your class, kind of watch the clock for maybe when you hit the last 5 minutes and then taking a clip from this, whatever talk you're doing, and let the speaker end on their testimony. Right. I think there's a certain level of passion, articulation that's happening that's going to help you land the punch, right? The spiritual punch at the end of the lesson. So this is where you may want to, unless you showed the whole talk, right, in the beginning, or you just come here. I would say this is a good point to finish. It's, I don't know, 15, 20 paragraphs or something, and just end on saying, I'm just going to leave this in Elder Brown, because this is the part, as you remember, he got really warmed up, really passionate about his words. And so this would be a fantastic place to at least share from his own mouth these words, sort of starting from there. So, or you can do whatever you want, but this is sort of what felt good for me. So, all right. The next is a gift from our loving Heavenly Father is meant to be eternal because the giver is eternal. To me, that was just an interesting framing of the things we receive from God, that these are eternal things because they come from the eternal maker. And there's so much to sit with and contemplate that, right? That it actually should last a long time. The testimonies shouldn't be fleeting, right? They should be powerful, uh, as they enter our hearts and our minds, like, because they are of eternal nature because they are given from an eternal creator. So anyways, just thought there's so much to go off of there as well. Again, you wouldn't cover all the stuff in one lesson. There's just not enough time, but obviously you have 20, 25 directions you can start off and go in. I already mentioned this, that the concept of taking charge of your testimony and that the dynamic of choice being involved in it. Here's one. In the early church, he tells a story about Parley P. Pratt felt disgruntled with the prophet Joseph Smith and chose to criticize him and the church, and how he talked about with John Taylor about how he thinks Joseph was the fallen prophet. And then he says, if Joseph Smith was then what's the line? That if he was a prophet 6 months ago, he's a prophet today. You're probably seeing it on the screen. Anyways, my one thought here is that, yeah, this is like a powerful story to tell again of Parley P. Pratt and John Taylor, and you could do that. However, most people have probably heard the talk. They know the story. To me, it's a more opportunity to say what stories are in the room, not necessarily in the conference talk, right? So who in this room, or you can maybe pinpoint some individuals beforehand, who do you know who left the gospel, who actually believed, then didn't believe, but then came back and believed again? What was the components? What's the story? And that will draw individuals into, again, to have an emotional experience that leads to a transformational experience. They're not just walking out of the room with new knowledge. They're walking out of the room as a new creature, right? So something to consider there. And that's it. So again, you can really end with a powerful punch there. by letting, showing a clip of at least the final words of the conference talk. But again, this is a fan favorite, if you can say that about a conference talk. Elder Brown, The Eternal Gift of Testimony, the most requested general conference talk to be studied in Elders Quorum Relief Society. So good luck in that. I think you'll do great. There's so much to work with here, and it'll be a fantastic opportunity. Again, if you know of a teacher, of an individual who'd like to contribute by doing a short video like this with some strategies and tactics to teach general conference in the second hour, please reach out. And good luck in teaching this. And I think it'll be a transformational experience teaching Elder Kevin G. Brown, The Eternal Gift of Testimony.